But going back to the Eagles, what do you do about this Jalen Hurts situation now? There are 2 games left in the regular season, and in order to get to 2 seed, the Eagles might have to win 1. They may not even have to win necessarily to get the 2 seed and win the division. So when you have the Cowboys who are eliminated from everything and the Giants who are terrible, you should be able to get the 2 seed with Kenny Pickett. At the same time, Jalen Hurts only played 5 minutes in the game against Washington. And then if he was to miss 2 more weeks, is he going to be rusty going into the playoff game, most likely against Washington, this time at home? So what is the line between caution and being prudent? What is the line between rest and rust? How do you do both? How do you make sure that Jalen Hurts is healthy, but at the same time don't make it to where Jalen Hurts is rusty for a playoff game? Because the odds are this week he will not be cleared because it's been difficult for players to be cleared in 1 week. Also adding to this is you now have Saquon Barkley because of the great first quarter he had with the 109 yards. He ends up with 150 total. He's right back on pace to break the all-time single-season rushing record. And if he does 150 again, he would need, 130-some yards the last week of the season against the Giants to break the record. And that's something the offensive line would definitely want. But then there's a lot of fans that say, they have to beat the Cowboys so they can have a bye week. Well, if they have all the other starters sitting, you can't put Jalen Hurts out there the last game of the year if he's not cleared. I am now tied up in knots. What is the best way to handle this? Because the loss to Washington is not the be-all, end-all of the season. They can still win the Super Bowl. They can still do a lot of things. But what, Andrew, would you do if you're the head coach about Jalen Hurts when you put in all the other factors, including the Saquon Barkley thing, to where if he was just going to have a 2,000-yard season, they probably don't even consider the last game. But this record has been held for 40 years. And we've seen Nick Sirianni listens to his leadership on that offensive line. It's part of the reason why they ran the ball so much after week 4. Even though I do wonder if that conversation ever happens if A.J. Brown plays week 2, 3, or 4, but we don't have a time machine. We don't actually know. So you got to figure Lane Johnson, Mailata, Dickerson, they're going to come forward and say, Coach, we want to get Saquon the record. At the same time, the fans might be saying, well, they've been playing football every week since week 5. They need a rest. And you have a quarterback coming off a concussion. So for right at the top of the show, Andrew, you're Nick Sirianni. You're in charge. Let's take it step by step. What do you do? How are you cautious? How do you use caution with Jalen Hurts while at the same time, recognize that there's a locker room that wants to break an important record?
Wow, so there's a lot of layers to this, right?
Yeah.
Because this week's probably going to be out of his hands with the concussion, having to get through protocol. But looking further ahead, if I'm Nick Sirianni, knowing how the offense fared in week 1, not having played in the preseason, Jalen Hurts goes out there and he plays against the Packers, throws for 278, 2 touchdowns. Yes, he did have the 2 interceptions, but the passing game looked better than it had for most of the season.
Yeah.
So I think knowing that, I wouldn't have rust as a factor there. And I would be more inclined to rest and preserve my starters, give them that built-in bye week, really, and kind of go forward and take on the Commanders, who it would be right now, and at full strength.
All right. So you're saying as far as Jalen Hurts goes, we're sitting them down, we're not worried about rust, and you're going to sit the starters down. Now let me add another to this then.
Sure.
What if it's not 150 against Dallas? What if it's 170 against Dallas? Now he's, 268? So if he gets 170, he now needs less than 100 yards for it to break a 40-year-old record. Lane Johnson comes into your office. He locks the door. He sits down, locks the door behind him. Coach, we want to break this record. At least give us a half. What do you say to him?
I'll give you a half. That's what I would say. And Nick Sirianni is one to listen to his players. You saw how receptive he was during the bye week in terms of just becoming a run-centric team. So I think if he's that close, Ty, knowing how that's a prestigious record. That's one of the top records in the NFL, and there's a reason why it hasn't been broken in 40 years.
40 years.
Yeah, it's difficult to attain. So I think all things considered, you have to give Saquon the opportunity. However, I don't know that I'm leaving the offensive line and Saquon and Jalen out there for the entire game, especially if it turns out to be meaningless. But if you're that close, you have to give him the opportunity to do it.
Right, and then obviously if against Dallas he gets 70 yards, you don't even think about it at that point, especially if they win the game. All right, let's say, though, they lose to Dallas and they need the game, in theory. They won't know because I'm sure they'll make that game 1 o'clock. So you won't know at kickoff whether or not, because they can still change it to make it. Technically, if both Minnesota and the Lions both lost this week, and then they'd be playing each other the last week, they would put that game at the same time as the Eagles, because technically the Eagles would be back in play for the 1 seed if the Eagles were able to win, and that happened. But in the scenario that they lose to Dallas, and now you need the game hypothetically for the 2 seed and the division, technically you need it. At that point, does your thinking change about how you handle Jalen Hurts and the record?
Yeah, I think it's business as usual. You go out there, you try to run your offense and execute it. And I think the Eagles have proven that their offensive line, their identity to play that Bowie ball style will lend itself to eventually popping off a big run or two, which could in turn lead to the record, and it probably happens organically. But I think in the scenario that you just outlined, I think you have to go, full throttle in your approach and not really deviate from your plan.
Now, I think they're going to beat Dallas with I'll just be honest right at the top. I don't think Jalen Hurts is going to play. And I still think they're going to find a way to beat Dallas. But I do think that Saquon's going to have a big enough day. Here's the next layer of concern I have. He had, almost 30 carries against Washington.
Right.
I think he's probably going to need 25-plus carries against Dallas with Kenny Pickett in there. At some point, I got to now also weigh and have to use caution with him, because he's having a career high in touches. He's taking more hits, although that's actually not true. The thinking would be he's taking more hits than he has in previous years. If you look at his yards before contact this year, it's actually not true at all.
Right.
But in football, it only takes one hit. We know it only takes one hit. Fitzpatrick comes in, hits him on the side of the knee. He was kind of banged up during that game.
The thigh, yeah.
In the thigh. So he kind of hits him on the side of the leg, and that happened, and he was fine. So I'm also worried about maybe not getting him some rest before the playoffs. But I also do think if him and the offensive line want the record, I have to also consider it. And the Jalen Hurts concussion then plays a role in what way? Because people might be thinking, well, what does that have to do with things? Well, if you're playing your other starters, he'll be cleared by the Giants. Why would you not have him out there?
Exactly. And his style of play, he's going to run the football. Him being that +1 makes that offense so lethal, and it unlocks a different identity, a different dimension. So he's going to be, prone to hits. He's going to take hits. He's not going to play, tentative out there. So that kind of adds another layer to what you're talking about. Do you pull back a little bit?
And this is where I'm in a jam. This is where I don't know the right answer. Now, I have an opinion. I never come on the air without an opinion. But this is one of those situations where I kind of want to hear from the text messages today and from the people at 610-632-0975, because I can be convinced a lot of different ways. Your plan of you beat Dallas, you sit everybody down and have a bye week, that's very conventional and very prudent, and I have no issues with that. The offensive line saying, I want to get Saquon Barkley this record, and Saquon saying, my body feels good, you've been resting me at practice, I'm fine. I can be convinced to go that way. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Really appreciate it. If you want more of this content, make sure you like and subscribe. And you can do that kind of over here if you want more of the best show ever.